Knock. Knock and barter for Desert Storm trading cards.
Hey there, everyone. I've been seeing a lot of stuff and hearing a lot of stuff about bartering recently, so I wanted to do this video. I'm not quite sure why it's such a hot topic in preparedness circles. I mean, I get it. I get the situations where it would be important, but I don't think it's something that people ought to spend a whole lot of time or a whole lot of storage space on collecting bartering supplies. So I wanted to go through some of the pluses and minuses of all this. I think anybody who spends a whole lot of time or resources on bartering supplies is probably more concerned with becoming some sort of post-collapse or SHTF Walmart rather than survivability. Because as preppers, we all know that, you know, we're in situations like that, especially the beginnings of situations like that, we're trying to avoid people.
You did anything to avoid people.
And we're trying to avoid that contact altogether. So, you know, putting yourself out there and being that guy that's going to be that post-collapse CEO or whatever, you're kind of putting a target on your back, I think, in most situations. So, but again, there are situations where it would be absolutely necessary. Medical supplies, antibiotics, first aid supplies, stuff like that, where you may find yourself in a situation where it's unavoidable. There are situations where, like I said, short-term disasters where maybe you can, you know, capitalize on a situation. If you've got...
Say, what kind of toilet paper you got back there?
You know, the great toilet paper shortage of 2020. If you've got that toilet paper and somebody is willing to give you some silver coins or whatever for that the value far outweighs the cost of that toilet paper, and you know there's an end in sight, you know, maybe you do kind of capitalize on that. There's history shown over and over again that during disasters, a lot of people will capitalize on that if they have the means. People will take gold and silver for these other supplies if they know they can kind of last out the whole disaster and then come out on the other end much better off. But the odds of that happening are pretty slim. So I read something from Jim Cobb recently that where he said, in order for a successful trade to happen, the following conditions must be met. You have to have something somebody else wants and needs. They have to have something you want or need. And you are both aware that each other exists. And while I know it's important to have a plan B and C, I think that if condition 2 was met, you probably did something wrong or something went wrong in your plans. So, and I know that there are situations where things don't go according to plan. So again, I'm not saying you totally failed if you find yourself in a bartering situation. There's spoilage, there's theft and loss, and maybe Uncle Joe comes to your door.
True international under pressure.
And you don't have quite as much food as you thought you had. Things like that. Your plans always change. So I understand there are situations like that, but I think it's smarter to focus on, you know, the big areas of preparedness as much as you can to kind of minimize the need for some of this stuff. And one big point that a lot of us don't really think about is what Jim said here, is that we're both aware that each other exist. And I think this is one where, you may have something somebody else wants or needs, and we're going to go into some of the stuff that is useful, but you may have some of the stuff that somebody wants or needs, but they've got to know you're around. They've got to have what you need, and all of those conditions need to be met. So it's not quite as easy as, hey, I've got 5 chickens, and then I've got a bunch of eggs that I can barter with. Also with that is what happens when somebody finds out you have 5 chickens and takes a couple, and then you don't have 5 chickens anymore. Also with this, why I don't think should be as big a topic as it is most of the disaster scenarios that we think of are going to be the short-term variety, the civil unrest, the natural disasters, the personal doomsdays, situations like that where there will be an end in sight, and situations like that where, for the most part, like I said before, especially in the beginning, we're going to want to stay away from other people. You think about how this pandemic started. Each disaster situation is different. A grid down event would be, you would want to stay away from everybody. You think about how this pandemic started, and it was kind of a slow rolling type situation. So it wasn't all that bad. Now, I suppose in these short-term type disaster situations, things like food, water, fuel, stuff like that will hold more value than it currently does. So you could kind of make I suppose, a profit off of stuff like that, as long as there was an end in sight. If it was a grid down event or something like that, you could trade that toilet paper for the gold and silver or whatever that may be and kind of make a profit out of it.
In Philadelphia, it's worth $50.
The dangerous part about that is you don't really know how long something's going to last. So if you trade away all your food, all your fuel, and something goes on a month longer than you thought it was going to, you may find yourself in a bad situation. So it's that double-edged sword with bartering. There's just you just never know. Now, I will say in some sort of short type disaster situation, short-term event, the giving things away and helping your neighbors may not have a quote unquote monetary value, but it will reap rewards in other ways as far as community and trust and all of that stuff. It's kind of like when a neighbor moves into the neighborhood and they bring you over cookies.
She put out freaking cookies.
You almost feel obligated to pay them back, or just your feelings about them change. And hey, these are good people. I can, I may want to, dig a little bit deeper into whether they're good people or not. But people almost feel obligated. So being able to help your neighbors and do things like that, and maybe even bartering, but not trying to gouge somebody, may help build those relationships and stuff. So you just never know. So with that, when it comes to large scale events, I wanted to kind of figure out a timeline, and this is just a general timeline of how things may unfold. It's going to be different with every different disaster situation. So like I said, this is general. Some things are slow rolling. Some things take a while to build up. Some things happen right away. So this, like I said, this is kind of just a general timeline. But when you're looking at the large scale events, like maybe an economic collapse, a pandemic that is worse than this one that we're currently in, a large scale grid down event, anything like that is going to have, it's not just going to be those one disasters. They're going to have secondary and tertiary events that go along with those. So an economic collapse, that may be slow rolling. That may be something that happens right away. But what different things can that cause down the line? We need to think about all of those things. An economic collapse could cause the grid to go down. It could cause those personal doomsdays. Maybe the grid doesn't go down, but you lose your job and you can't afford to get that electricity on. So as we think about these big disasters, we need to think about this other stuff that involves. But the timeline for these things, I think, and again, this is just general, but I think the first week or so would be people just kind of wondering, kind of in a daze, deer in the headlights type situation where they're wondering what's going on, what to do, who's going to help them, all of this different stuff.
Now what do we do?
And then after that, that's, for us preppers, that's where we kind of go into our bubbles and say, okay, we got to just watch, wait, and see what happens. After that, you're talking, in the month to 3 month range, depending on what the situation is. You're talking about this is, I think, the most dangerous part. You're talking about massive chaos. You're talking about probably the die-off, depending on what the situation is. You're talking about a situation where we're going to want to stay away from people. So in the first, few months or so, I don't even see bartering in a large-scale type situation as an option. It just wouldn't be. For some people, the average person, that doesn't, the average person that's not a prepper, bartering, like Selko said on one of his articles over at The Organic Prepper, bartering would start off pretty quickly as soon as they didn't have access to some of this stuff, and they would try to figure out how to get food and all that. So the average person, it would start off pretty quickly. As preppers, though, the ones of us that are doing it right anyway, it's probably going to be a while before any sort of situation presents itself where bartering would be useful. Now, in situations like that where maybe somebody ends up on your front door, maybe that is a situation where you want to, kind of offer them some beans and rice, or, a pound of rice or something like that, just to get them to leave without telling them, hey, you get the hell out of here type thing. Maybe diffuse that situation by giving them a little bit of that, and then maybe bartering for something that they have just to get the deal done and get them to leave without causing a big ruckus and stuff like that. Tough, just a lot of variables and all this stuff. So it's tough to kind of figure out. But I think after a year or so, and one more time, this is a general timeline, but after a year or so, I think is when you start to see everybody starts to become comfortable with the new normal, whatever that is, whatever that looks like.
World's back to normal. That's all.
No, it isn't.
And I think that's the point where some of this bartering stuff will come into play a lot bigger or a lot more than in the beginning stages of something. So my whole point with this is if you're preparing, if you're storing stuff for bartering, it's going to be a while in these large scale situations. It could be a while before stuff like that is useful. Silka also talked about on one of my podcasts, I believe it was 255, about items that would be useful for bartering. And he talked about a lot of the smaller, more inexpensive stuff, the stuff that's easy to store, the stuff that has a long shelf life, the stuff that other people are going to find useful, as well as stuff that if you are storing it and that opportunity for bartering doesn't come up, you're going to be able to use it as well. So he was talking about things like Bic lighters, medications, antibiotics, candles, all that stuff that people would find useful. So like I said, if storing a whole bunch of lighters isn't probably the best thing to do, but if you happen to find a great deal on a case of 100 lighters or something like that, why not? I mean, you just never know. He also talked about people who are addicted to stuff.
Do not, my friends, become addicted to water.
So you've got alcohol, pot, stuff like that. Maybe you wouldn't want, the hard drugs and stuff like that. It's kind of a double-edged sword because you've got people that are addicted to stuff that know you have stuff, but at the same time, that stuff is going to be more valuable because people are addicted to this stuff. People are going to want to escape reality, kind of. So maybe, I don't know about growing a bunch of weed. That's going to give off a big smell, and that's going to make you a big target. But just bartering this stuff in the first place is going to kind of make you a big target. Also, if you were, bartering here and there may not be that big of a deal. But if you're going large scale, like that post-collapse Walmart I talked about, you're putting a huge target on your back.
See, that's too much exposure.
And if you're going large scale like that, you also have to have a central spot where you're doing it from, and people are going to understand that. Probably a good idea as far as bartering in an SHTF type situation is never do it from your home. Always go somewhere else. Don't take all of your supplies with you, maybe just a few, some things that you may be able to get rid of, because you don't want to take everything with you and then have somebody take all that stuff and then you're screwed. But just a lot of different variables to all of this. So while I get the whole bartering aspect of preparedness and why it could be important, I just don't think it's something that we focus on. We just never know how situations are going to unfold and what's going to be useful, what's not going to be useful. I mean, we know the basics and all that, but we may need that stuff. And if we're focusing on, we've got a whole room full of booze that we're going to use to barter for food in a post-collapse situation. What happens if, one, somebody comes and steals all that stuff? Two, you can't find anybody to barter with that actually has that food. So it's kind of a crapshoot at that point, I suppose. So
Just never know. Never know what you're going to get.
So in closing, like I said, I don't think it's, if you find a great deal on some Bic lighters or candles or stuff like that, go ahead and get that stuff. I mean, if it doesn't take up a lot of space, if it's got a long shelf life and you can end up using it possibly, why not go ahead and get that? Because you never know when and if that stuff will become useful. I just wouldn't put a lot of energy. I would keep all my energy focused on the food, the water, the things that I'm going to need, the things that I know I'm going to need, and not kind of depend on the whole bartering aspect to get the things that I need. So, and again, things happen that's why you have to have a plan B, plan C. Things happen. There's spoilage, there's stuff, there's, maybe you're in a bug out situation, all of these different things that could happen to your preparedness plans that change everything. So having these different things that may be useful in situations like that, it's not a terrible idea. I just make sure that I put the amount of resources into the right aspects of preparedness before I go into stuff like this. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on it, though. I know it's a popular subject in the preparedness community. I don't know that there is one right answer because it really depends on how a situation unfolds, what happened. In the scenario with Selko, where he was talking about the Balkans, that was a completely different scenario than, say, something that would be wide scale here in the United States where the grid goes down or something like that. That was pretty centralized, and everybody was kind of they were kind of in the game together. Now, granted, there were warlords and people trying to steal from other people and all of that stuff, but bartering became its own little entity, I suppose, in the Balkans, where bartering became a big part of that. But there may be situations where it doesn't. So we just never know. All we can do is think about these things and prepare. But I'd love your guys' thoughts on it. If you have any, leave a comment below. But until next time, we'll talk to y'all later.